All right, so today I'm here with Dr. Dayle Smith, the Dean of the College of Business for Loyola Marymount University. And I just wanted to talk to Dayle about the CV for a clinical professor or a professor of the practice, because that's what sort of DBA students are interested in pursuing. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. When business schools are looking to hire faculty, they are, because they're an accredited institution, there are certain types of faculty that they look for. So obviously the traditional academic, somebody who is what they call tenure track, is somebody who has gotten a traditional PhD. It's focused on research, and those follow a very different pathway. But at the same time, business schools recognize that it's important to have not only professors who are tenure track and traditional prepared academics, but also to have folks who have real leadership experience in industry, because the blend of practice and theory is, of course, what makes for a wonderful faculty. And one of the things I've always done in leading our business school, as well as previous dean positions and associate dean positions that I've held, is this notion of how do you find that balance? How do you get tenure track faculty working with professors of practice, or what we call clinical faculty, and recognizing that one is not better than the other. They're different. They're different, but together they create a really powerful staff to deploy in teaching your students.
Yeah, and especially at a school like LMU where we're scholar practitioners, and teacher scholars, and we're very focused on students. We're not having TAs teach our students. So that blend of the experience,
Mhm.
obviously the scholarly academics as well, but then, people who are focused on teaching and who care about how good they are as teachers is really important as well.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that I like to think about is when you compare big research institutions, they're not really caring so much, although that may change with the current attack on higher ed. But one of the things that you notice is in an R1 institution, which is primarily related to research, faculty are judged on 80% is their research and maybe 20% is teaching and service. So they are not rewarded. Their whole system is really about where they publish, what they publish, and how much they publish. Therefore, when people talk about the academy, you'll often hear this concept of publish or perish, right? And that's the tenure mentality. Clinical faculty, on the other hand, are hired because of what they bring to the classroom. So even at LMU, as you said, it's a scholar teacher model. So we are 40% teaching, 40% research, and 20% service. And with our clinical faculty, that changes even more to maybe 70% teaching and 30% maybe a combination of research and service. We're not, in some clinical positions at a lot of universities and community colleges, it could be 100% teaching or 90% teaching and a percentage of service. But essentially, you're being rewarded, and what matters is different. And one of the reasons I love LMU is this balanced approach to teaching and research. So applied research that DBAs do, coupled with their passion for teaching and wanting to give back to the next generation, it's a wonderful model for why I like to hire really strong clinical faculty.
Yeah, great. So what kinds of things should folks be not only looking for, but then highlighting as something that that's going to make them stand out as a clinical professor?
I think, first of all, it's a mindset. One of the things you have to transition to is I was a corporate leader or running my own company or what have you. And now I have to transition from being sort of an executive to a faculty member. And that's a very different kind of thing. In fact, it's really hard sometimes for our faculty to transition to thinking about being a dean or an associate dean or a leadership role. That too is a change in mindset. So for clinical faculty, it's thinking, it's more than just I'm in the classroom and I'm going to tell war stories about what I've learned. But I think the power of what clinical faculty do and what a clinical faculty should focus on is how what they've done in industry makes them a good teacher through I can bring real world examples to the theories that I'm teaching to you. I can present a case situation or scenarios. And then based on your reading of the text and the different concepts that we've talked about in class, I can engage you in a discussion where you're involved in the analysis. So I think that's the real key in why an executive can be so powerful as a clinical teacher, but you have to suspend that. My job is to stand up and be sage on the stage telling war stories about what it was like when I was head of XYZ at this particular company. So you're thinking about that transition. And then you're also demonstrating kind of the other part of the mindset is demonstrating this readiness to teach. And it's almost a shame that we call it teaching because it's really about how do I create a learning ecosystem. The most effective interviews I've held with clinical faculty are the ones that talk about how students learn and what I can do to coach them so that they learn more and they can apply what they're learning to the problems and the challenges they'll face when they're out at a company. So I think that's a key transition and part of that mindset. And then obviously the third part of the mindset, if one is preparing for that transition and second is demonstrating that you know what it takes for teaching and learning to work in an ecosystem, the last part is how do I navigate my search for a position that way? And again, your leadership that you've had in your company is important, but it's way more important to really focus on what we call the academic CV that can show that. So as if I were a doctoral student in a DBA at this point, I would be looking for opportunities to give a guest lecture in class, find a faculty member who might want to bring me in to not only share my experience, but to demonstrate my ability to use that experience to actually engage in that learning process. And if you have a few of those under your belt, then when you're applying for that job, not only do you have a faculty member in the academy who can talk about what a marvelous teacher you'd be, but you also have experiences with students and you can talk about a lesson plan that you developed and how you took a concept that you were passionate about and created a learning module around that. And I think that would be pretty powerful.
That's great. And they're going to do that as part of this class. So that's fabulous. So talk about the CV itself. How is that different from like a resume that somebody would have used in the corporate space?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So in a corporate space, you would typically start, the classic CV is, your name, your address. You might put your education. If you've got multiple years of experience, you throw your education at the bottom, right? And you start with this is, my job as chief marketing officer or, senior director of strategy or whatever that position might be. And then you would do chronologically your career, starting from where you are now to where you started, and then your education would be at the very end. And you flip that model a little bit in your CV, in your faculty CV, because you really start with, name, address, then your education. So you're going to say, I have a doctorate in business administration. That's the first degree you'll list. Then if you have a master's, bachelor's, etc. Now you will then go to your experience and you can use it chronologically. But for a DBA looking for a teaching position, what you might want to do is separate out your teaching experience, guest lectured for these universities, did these learning modules, and then you might move to your career experience. So I would use two different headings if I were a DBA student looking for my chapter 2 to become a teacher or even just to be a part-time adjunct professor. I would, after my education, I would put my experience that's teaching, and I would even call it teaching and learning experience and keep that as a heading. And then finally, industry experience right under that. That would be my next thing I would talk about. Then I would add something called, publications and research. So the papers that you've written in this program, even if they're not published, you can talk about, papers I've presented and the topics and the titles of those papers start to show somebody who is deeply committed to understanding, how fields, how disciplines move forward. So I would go with, publications, presentations, conferences that I've made. Then you follow it up with grants, honors, and awards. So for example, the fact that one of you has got a research award from the library at LMU. I mean, Edgar, this one's for you. I mean, you would put that front and center because that again demonstrates your commitment to doing things that are more in the academic realm as opposed to the industry realm. And then after grants, honors, and awards, then, anything else that's informational. Now, under your teaching experience, so moving back up, one of the things you could do to divide that section up is in the teaching experiences, you could have subheadings, classes that I'm capable of teaching, and then some bullet points of, look at the catalog for the university that you want to apply for and look at the courses that they teach. What courses are you feeling comfortable teaching? So you could list those. You're taking research methods, for example, here in the DBA program. You might even put research methods, and then in parentheses, you might indicate what your comfort level is with Stato or SPSS, what have you. So, those would definitely be things that I would put in there for teaching. And then experience in teaching and anything that you've done, whether it's been a guest lecture, working on a module with with colleagues, sample teaching that you've done, materials that you may have created, all of that can be part of that. And lean on those of us that are in the college. In other words, you've got clinical faculty who are already here and part-time faculty who are here. Take a look at their resumes. I will tell you that the resumes that jump out to me, and I get resumes all week long and end up here. And the ones that I send over to my chair saying, hey, this person looks interesting, is the person who has taken the time to really indicate why a doctorate has really set them up to be successful as a teacher, as opposed to just, yeah, I've been a big shot in industry and I can tell war stories. And I'm looking for that person who can interpret the difference. So a resume is your first way to tell that story. And you think about it as a narrative. So, quick summary, your name, address, contact information, your education, your teaching experience. And then you would want to go from there chronologically from your industry experience. And then obviously publications, conferences, honors, and awards.
Great. And you alluded to this a little, but would you tailor it for each job that you were applying for?
If it's an open call where people just say, we're hiring adjunct or part-time faculty, submit a CV, that would be hard to tailor, but you could tailor the cover letter, and we could talk a little bit about that. The other thing that I would always include, because a lot of people don't want to go through pages of resumes, I love including a bio. So, rather than me looking you up on LinkedIn, if you've included a bio that sort of shares who you are, a DBA looking for their next chapter 2, here is some of the experience and how I could translate it. That bio is that quick story. It's storytelling that shares what somebody is able to do. It should show your experience and vision, maybe for your career, your skill sets, your degrees, and some highlights. It's funny. I was when Kelly asked me to do this, I was thinking, what does my bio really focus on? And I went back to my narrative that I wrote at the time that I submitted to LMU to get this job. And what I noticed is in mine, it sort of had a few parts. The first part was what I currently do and what I lead. So, leading strategy and operations and fundraising, that sort of stuff. The second paragraph was on what those roles were. So it gives you a sense of my skill sets. Then I talk about prior to this job, here are some highlights of my career. And then I indicated, they're looking for a global leader. So I talked about the teaching that I did internationally with different groups. And then finally, I line about what I've authored, and then finally what my degree was in. And so it set itself up as, 6 paragraphs, but it's short. It's just a few sentences here and there, but it told a story at a glance, who I am and what I could potentially contribute. Then if you're interested in that, then you look at the CV, as opposed to somebody who sends me a CV and then I have to look them up on LinkedIn. So I think a bio prevents the recruiter from doing that extra work. I'm not saying you're not going to eventually check it out, when you're checking references, but again, it's how do you make it easier for you to pop? What makes you interesting? Tell that story.
Right, that's great. So it sounds like it's a companion piece to the CV,
Yep.
as is a cover letter. So talk about cover letters and what they should be doing with a cover letter.
Okay, so for me, I like to look at what are the key elements of a cover letter. So if you were applying for an executive position, everyone says it's all about the CV. A cover letter should be short, concise, 1 page, etc. For an academic position, the cover letters are telling the story of what's in the CVs, so they tend to be a little longer. So for example, it might start with an introduction where you state the position you were applying for, and you briefly mention, how you learned about the position and why you're interested in the role. And this is where you're customizing it to the institution. I heard about the role at LMU, given its focus of balance between teacher and scholar and its dedication to mission as a Jesuit institution. My values are very much aligned with that, so ergo I'm applying for this position. So that's sort of the introductory paragraph or paragraphs. The second part is really where the story gets a little bit longer. So here's the body of the letter itself. This is where you're analyzing what the position opportunity is. I like to think of it almost like a little mini case study. If LMU's business school is looking for somebody to come and teach strategy and operations or HR management, this is your chance to see what are their needs and what do you have in your background that meets those needs. So it's an essay, it's a case study. So prepare a response. Provide specific examples of your achievements and what you've accomplished in your career that turns into your ability to teach HR or to teach strategy or to teach operations, whatever the topic is. And then share, once you've finished all of that case analysis, remember to draw conclusions. How does the evidence I've just shared with you, how does that demonstrate that I can meet the needs that you've specified in terms of what you're looking for? So that's the body. And then the third or the last section is kind of reiterating your enthusiasm for the position. After 15 or 20 years in my industry, I'm really excited about giving back. I've sought the DBA to be able to learn to both teach and consult. And here is why I'm so excited about your position in particular and what I think I can do with the students. Another thing that I think helps clinical faculty is look at their website of the school. For example, we have 18 student organizations that cover the gamut from women in business to the finance, association to, all of our different disciplines. We have a consulting group called Crimson Consulting. We have all of these different student orgs. Take a look at those, and that could be part of your letter. As a practitioner in industry, I have a lot of experience in HR management. I'm a member of SHRM. And I think if you are looking for people who could also contribute to or partner with a faculty who is the faculty advisor, here's how I can, help with that as well. So I think those are the places where you really tailor to the individual school. Whereas, the CV isn't specific to a school, it's specific to an academic position.
Yeah, great. So you've done a good job of kind of highlighting what stands out positively for you when somebody submits their CV. What are some common mistakes or pitfalls? What are the things that you cringe and say, nope, that goes on the no pile?
Let's see, the common mistakes. Typos. It used to be that back when I was finishing graduate school, we called it the Big Eight, the great accounting firms. And one of the ways that they culled through the resumes is the ones that had typos they didn't even bother with. And that made this pile, this small. So, that makes me cringe because if they're not careful there, why would I trust them with our students, right? Because you want them to be role models for our students. A generic cover letter bugs me because then I know, oh, they're sending this out to 100 institutions. And quite frankly, it's not that hard to write a generic cover letter following the steps I said. And then a couple of those paragraphs get customized. And then it shows me that you looked at our website, you know what our needs are, you understand the mission of our institution. So I'm looking for that. So when it's a generic cover letter, it stands out really high. I don't want a 10-page cover letter. 2-3 pages is probably good in telling the story. Another mistake that makes me cringe is when there's a lack of specific examples. In other words, you've got a position that you've written about, but you haven't told me what you did. So I have no way of judging, are you up on the trends in industry? Are you keeping up with industry practice? Because if I'm bringing in a clinician, I want somebody who my full-time tenure track faculty can also learn from and hopefully work together with. And somebody's got that practice. I want to see those specific examples. The other thing, and this may be me because of my background in communication, is I can't stand poor formatting. What I mean by that is when I'm reading a document, I like a document that pops, that I very quickly, when you're looking at a lot of paperwork, I want something that I can quickly see the headings. I can quickly see bullet points. I know who you are and what you do. The bio has helped me. Even a bio sometimes could have subheadings if it's, on the longer side. So I want it to be well organized, easy to read. And in one of the books I wrote years ago, we called it the read me phenomenon. I want a document to cry out, read me first. I'm easy to read. You're going to like what you've read. And it's all subliminal, but white space, neat headings, bullet points. Even before I get to the detail, I have a sense of how you've organized your story. So I look for formatting. So I think those are, specific things. And of course, somebody who ignores the job description. I get faculty from all over the country, actually all over the globe, that will write to LMU and they'll be talking about something that we've never hired for ever. I mean, they completely miss any of the keywords that would say, this is a great place to work. Um, so, those would be some of the things that I would look for.
Yeah, that's great. So here's the big question, given the world we live in today, AI, no AI, what would you say? Especially given that, in many cases, the first round is AI read, right? So
Potentially. And of course, if AI is reviewing, let's say there's 100 resumes, and we use AI to be able to tell me who are the candidates who most likely would fit well with LMU. That's when your keywords, your customization, that's all going to pop for the AI. Um, I think of AI as a strategic tool, not a substitute. So I'm using AI in my job every single day. I think of it, I remember Jim Nagus and I were having a conversation, and Jim says, I consider AI my learning partner. And I loved that way of phrasing it because I think I look at AI that way as well. So for example, when, I'm giving a presentation on something, I will start with, AI to make the first part of it, give me all the stuff. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to call through it and I'm going to analyze what AI gave me, make sure there's no hallucinations and faulty information, use my brain in assessing what the machine gave me. It's amazing to me how many of our undergraduate students forget that piece. In other words, to use AI well and to use it strategically means you have to think critically. So I definitely am a huge fan of all of this and what it can do. But if you forget to engage your own brain in analyzing what's there, then you miss the ability to use it to be creative, to be strategic, to think more broadly than you could on your own. But it's the ability to call. Let me give you an example. Last week we had Microsoft here running a simulation for us, and it was a kind of a silly simulation in some sense. We had to create a mermaid hospital. And so you're thinking about interspecies medicine. And it was very out there. And it was a design thinking exercise. And all of us individually used prompts to be able to get at information that was in the World Wide Web. But then we came together as a team to review what we had each found. And then melding that together, it gave us an ability as a group to be much more creative. So using AI individually and then working together to take what AI has given you and working as a team, so powerful, particularly if you're engaging in a design thinking kind of methodology. I was blown away by what we could come up with. We were so much more powerful and synergistic as a team when AI became, in a team of three, AI became our fourth team partner. So I'm a fan. But the other thing is, I never send something to anybody that was AI generated without me doing a major edit so my personality comes through, that I'm being critically thoughtful. Could this go to anybody, or is this really sharing something? So AI can never say, hey, I understand there's an opportunity. I wouldn't start with hey. I understand there's an opportunity at your school through an interesting conversation I had with Professor Kelly Watson. In other words, that's the kind of thing a machine can't come up with. So you have to think about ways of using it to help you with content, but you're the critical thinker, you're the strategist. AI will never be a substitute for that. It'll give you strategy, but for you to assess that strategy means you're editing. And it's no different than when my husband and I used to do a lot of co-authoring. We've written a number of books together and we played off of each other. So AI is just the third partner in that if we were to continue to do it. So it gives us ability to be stronger, better, but it doesn't take away that critical thinking and strategy. So that's where my head is at on AI today. And it's continually thinking about this. It's a
exactly. And where it
brave new
goes.
tool.
But it can't do the job for you, is what you're saying.
No, I mean,
they've got to do
there are lots of things that can be autonomously replaced by machine learning. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not naive about that, but I think what it does is it forces us to think about what can we uniquely bring. As a strategist, I always think, what's our comparative advantage? When you're talking about a company, what's the company's comparative advantage? Now, AI may be able to analyze the company and tell you what the comparative advantage is and may make recommendations on how you might use that to execute for profitability. But at the end of the day, you're making judgments about that. So all it does is it does the pre-work, but it means it's freeing you up to do higher thought level things. I don't know if anybody's worked with Bloom's taxonomy at all,
They
but
will have in this class.
okay, so what's interesting to me is if you look at lower level skills, those are the easy ones to test on, the easy ones to memorize. You can get a test, you can assess it, and you can say somebody had 90%. But when you get to the higher level order of critical thinking as opposed to memorization, when you're getting to that higher order of learning, the kind of work that you're doing, it's not that AI can't be a part of that, but ultimately it's shifting your ability to have to do it better, more thoughtful, more critical of it. So I guess that's how I think of it, is that is it replacing some humankind? Yeah. But what it's forcing us to do is to be more thoughtful and more strategic.
Yeah,
So yeah. So higher level jobs. I don't think AI is the solution to teaching, but it could be the solution to the basic level teaching, where you're just teaching nuts and bolts and concepts. You don't need a teacher to interact with. And in fact, as AI as a partner, you can actually interact if you get really good at prompting, where it helps you think more critically. So the exercises we were doing with Microsoft around this Mermaid Hospital, every time I would ask AI to do something, it would come back to me with 3 more questions I had to think about and talk about with my group. And then we would respond and, type it in. And then the AI would come back and ask even, 3 more questions. So it's forcing me to be a better thinker. And ultimately, I had to be a choice maker. But AI was helping me in that process. So I think as teachers, our responsibility is to teach people how to use AI, because it's here and we might as well, lean in and show how it can be that partner, but how ultimately a teacher is still helping you engage with it and is still asking you to consider other things beyond that.
for sure. Yeah, well, that's great. And I think that takes some of the relief out of things like, look, I'm not going to get busted if I use AI. It's more, how can I use AI to make everything I'm doing better,
Yeah. And to be really strategic about it. I would be more concerned about a professor who comes at it as AI is unethical. There are unethical uses of AI.
Exactly.
Say AI in and of itself is unethical. No, it's how you use it, the choices you make, how you communicate about those choices. Those are the critical ways of thinking about it philosophically. And I think all of us will continue to be shaped by the speed at which this thing is innovating, and how, as human beings, we bring that ethical dimension. So being ethical leaders and thinking about how we use it and what we do with it is still going to be part of the conversation for years to come.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you went down this road, because I was really thinking at first just about the CV, but
Ah,
undoubtedly someone's going to get a question in an interview about how, what is your point of view on students using AI? And I think you've taken us into a really good realm here, which is thinking through your philosophy on teaching and how it incorporates AI, and also being mindful.
and technology, right? In other words, one of the things that our accreditor looks at is how are you using and integrating technology in your classroom, because you are shaping students who are going to go out in a techno-focused world. So
Yeah.
that philosophy is important. Going back for a second, Kelly, to the CV, I think once you finished your CV, I would ask AI to analyze it and say, is this CV that I've prepared, or is this cover letter, compelling? How might I include other things in this CV to make a case for why my industry experience and my new degree as a doctor of business administration make me perfect for this job? And have that conversation with your AI mentor, as opposed to, not using it at all. Now, you can certainly take your current CV and say, your current resume and say, turn this into a CV to apply for a position. But I wouldn't start there. I think it's really important to think through the steps that we've talked about in this conversation, and then use AI to see, does it give you something extra? But I think that first part of what you're going through helps you prepare for a real life interview, because you're not sending your AI, what's it called? Your own chatbot into the interview. You're the one who's going to be there.
That's right. So what about a philosophy of teaching. Is that an important thing for folks to think through before they go through this process, or do you have to teach in order to kind of come up with that? Is that something that's sort of a chicken and egg?
No, actually, I think the philosophy of teaching is something that's pretty powerful. And what's great about being in a program like a PhD or a DBA or even a master's program is you're engaging with teachers for your whole degree. So you're identifying, what do I like? What worked? What enabled me to learn? And what didn't work? And as you ask yourself those questions and answer them, you're starting to develop your philosophy. So I never took a class on how to teach, and I was a teacher for 30 years. I was a professor for 30 years. But one of the things that I did know is I tended to replicate the styles and methods of those I learned best from. And I avoided like hell the ones that I couldn't stand. So I hated multiple choice exams as a student. So I never gave one. I mean, it's like, yeah, that would be easy. And it would be a quick mode of assessment. But that wasn't how I learned. Memorization didn't do it for me. So you start to develop this philosophy by observing what worked for you as a learner and what didn't work. And that helps. And a lot of times I mentioned earlier that you could do your cover letter, your CV, and then you might do your bio. If you're being seriously considered for a position, you might indicate what is your teaching philosophy and do a 1 to 2 page philosophy about how you think about teaching. And that can be a compelling document that you share. And again, same rules apply. Specific descriptive examples. Something that shows that a machine didn't give you a philosophy, but that you've thought about professors that you've had. And I wouldn't put their names, but I would say, of all of the professors I had in my master's program and my doctoral program, one of the things I've been able to pull from that are, here are the things that really worked. And I could tell learning, not just me personally, but I could see the learning going on in my cohort versus these are the things I know didn't work. So as I'm working through what my philosophy is going to be, here's, the perspective I'm taking. And again, descriptive, specific, targeted, those are the big words that should help you think about how you communicate that. And you're going to be asked to often do that. So we just hired a clinical professor in ethics, business ethics. And in addition to the CV that they turned in, we asked them to teach a sample class. And we invited students to come. And the clinicians that came to teach this class were very different. We had 3 finalists. And the person who finally got the job was the person who most connected with the students. Their CVs were comparable. They all had similar credentials and background and experience. But the ones who really shined were the ones that you could see people light up in the classes that they taught. You knew something special was happening in that environment just as an observer. And I went to every one of those sessions, so I could absolutely see it. And I knew I had my favorite and was delighted to find out that the committee, aligned with who I thought was the best teacher. And the best teacher wasn't necessarily the one that had the most publications. I mean, for me, the best teacher I knew had the capabilities to do research. And it wasn't that it wasn't a passion. They looked forward to writing and co-writing with some other folks. But the real joy was what lit up the learning environment in the classroom. And it was visceral. I mean, you could just tell.
That's great. Well, thank you. Is there anything else that you want to say to these folks as they're contemplating their potentially teaching careers?
Yeah, as you start to look in what you want to do and you're putting your materials together, this does not have to be an isolated single experience. In other words, I always, and this is my advice to anyone, whether it's an undergraduate who's working on their resume for their very first job, or someone at the end of their career who's looking for a chapter 2 or to do something different. Once you've got your materials together, give it to friends that you trust to give you the hard critical feedback. Get feedback from lots of people. Talk to people in the industry who you're close with and ask them, what do you think? What's missing? What appeals to you here? The feedback you will get from your colleagues, it's mentors and coaches. So I highly value that. When I was getting my CV ready for my first dean's position, I remember my first job that I interviewed for that was moving from being a faculty member to, I was an associate dean moving to a dean. And I put my stuff together and the headhunter, the recruiter, gave me feedback on my resume. It was tough to hear. It was like, I know you think this is a good resume, Dayle, but it's not what they're looking for. And so all of the advice I just shared with you all today is the advice that recruiter gave me some 16, 17 years ago. And I've
Yeah.
continued to refine that every year. And now I've trusted colleagues in my women's network of deans that we share openly. And when we're facing challenges, we ask. When I put together a slide presentation for something I'm about to give, after AI has looked at it and made some suggestions, I give it to real people to tell me, is this boring? Would this excite you? And I'll get feedback like, here's a couple of questions you might put on a slide to engage everyone in conversation, in discussion. Because
Yeah.
we learn best when we're in conversation with others. And that's the
Yeah, it's that
learning.
whole coaching model, peer
Yeah,
coaching.
absolutely. So that would be my last words of advice. And I'm always happy to, as a dean, and since we don't have 100 doctoral students, it's a small group. I'm always happy to look at individual CVs and give you feedback. Your colleagues will. We have clinical faculty have been very successful, including your professor here, Kelly Watson. Use us. That's what we're here for. And we're really dedicated to producing folks, whether you decide you want to try part-time teaching or a full-time clinical, whether you want to go into a consultant role and hang your shingle out for consulting, or join a consulting firm now that you have this advanced knowledge. All of that you'll benefit by sharing what your aspirations are and getting the help to get it right, to put your best foot forward and your best set of materials forward. So yeah,
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I'm tickled that you agreed to do this, and I'm sure the students are going to really enjoy hearing you.
My pleasure. So
Thank you.